Thank you, everybody, for staying before lunch. We're standing between you and food, so hopefully this will be a great session to take away from. My name is Chenxi Wang. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for a container security company called Thrasher. I used to be an analyst with Forrester Research, so it's great to see Amy up here and giving talks. And it's great to see a full house of attendees. So what I have here are four esteemed panelists. Many of them are practitioners. They're doing DevOps practices every day on the front line of their work. So I'm very excited to have them sharing their experiences, opinions with you. What I'm going to do is go down the line, have them introduce themselves within 2 minutes. Because I was talking to some of them earlier, and they have fairly complicated long titles. I'm like, I'm not going to remember all that. So please introduce yourself. And within the 2 minutes, please take a little bit of time to explain the maturity of DevOps within your organization. Is it extensive? Is it just starting? And also your role within DevOps. Please, Chris.
Hi, hello.
Lower a little bit.
Can y'all hear me?
Is it on?
I don't.
Yeah,
Right.
it's not on. Can you guys?
Good mic check. Closer?
There we go. Maybe a little bit closer.
There we go. I'm Chris Corierre. I'm a DevOps engineer with autotrader.com, and I write for DevOps.com as well. Within AutoTrader, we really just hit an inflection point with our DevOps transformation. I do a lot of cheerleading and clapping, and I bake a lot of cookies, actually. You can get a room full of angry people who don't agree with each other together, and if you have homemade cookies and cold milk, they really can't get mad at you for bringing up touchy subjects.
I'm Paula Thrasher. I work for sort of a new company in a way. I worked for CSC, and we separated the federal and the commercial business, and then our federal business merged with SRA. And so we're a new company, which is called CSRA. You can see the cleverness in our naming there. And in creating a new company, we created a new group, and we call it our Digital Services Division. And so we're newly formed, focusing on trying to deliver digital services to the federal government. And in that organization, I'm leading in our DevOps sort of role of using that as a technique for how we want to deliver digital government transformations.
Hi, I'm Cornelius Roberts. Work for Booz Allen Hamilton. I specialize in Department of Defense agency work. We are in the middle of implementing, almost to FOC, our first DevOps pipeline. So we are on the way to maturity for sure. And that's pretty much where we are right now. Thanks.
Hello, how's it going? So my name is Gorelick. About, say, 5-6 years ago, hey, there's the mic. So you could hear me, though. You got all that? Awesome. So Gorelick, about 5-6 years ago, was a very early adopter with rugged DevOps. I was at a financial services firm. I was responsible for one-day IT, application development, and security. And I did what any good director executive would do. I panicked and stopped and thought and looked and reached out to Josh Corman, got involved with rugged DevOps. And we did great things with that organization, matured it, put in place a secure DevOps function, static code analysis, all the things you guys have been hearing about in this session. I've since left the organization. They were merged a couple years back. I'm now the director of strategy for a firm called CBI. And in that role, I reach out to other firms who are in that process of rolling out DevOps and talk about some of the things I learned and some of the things that they're doing and figure out how we can progress them.
Great, thank you. As you can see, we have experts from different industries. We've got internet applications, government, and financial services. So I was talking to various folks yesterday at different functions on DevOps, actually. VeriSign apparently just moved their entire new engineering efforts onto Docker containers. So it's a new thing for them, a new strategy, but it's a sweeping change. Another very large trading firm on Wall Street started an initiative to take old vertically integrated banking applications, moving them entirely to microservices. They're probably going to do it in 2 or 3 years time. But the goal is not only having DevOps agility, but having microservice components where they can provide as services to other firms to make money. So they couldn't expose these interfaces in the traditionally vertically integrated applications. Now they're projecting to be making additional revenues by, I don't know what exactly the number of millions, but it's going to be a brand new revenue stream for them. So this is what DevOps are doing for business, not only for development, but for business. So with these panelists, what I want to do, because we're focusing on policies and people process in this panel, so I would like to go down the panel and ask this question that certainly some companies are more successful in DevOps than others. Does it take a specific profile of a company to be successful? Profile meaning, does the security team have to be structured a certain way? Does the ops team have to be structured a certain way? Tell me, in your opinion, does it take a specific profile to have successful DevOps implementation? I'll start with you, Chris.
Yes.
And why not?
So we get this from recruiters a lot, which recruiters and vendors are two places we can improve relationships in our industry right now. But we've got a great culture. You should come work for us. Great culture. Well, what does that mean? Great culture for who? A lot of the DevOps practices are moving more towards experimentation, where you're not deciding you've got it figured out. You're going and forming a hypothesis, not, even if it's something, a motion you're in favor of, you're reserving judgment until you get the data to back it up. And a lot of the work I do is about automating that data flow and making data-driven decisions. This is really focused on quality. You have other organizations that are not as, their risk appetite isn't quite as high. They prefer more high-velocity production, which generally has you step away from quality. DevOps is really trying to balance between these two forces, in my opinion. The organization you work at is going to have a different risk appetite. And depending on that, they're either going to try to fall into that high-velocity production, or they're going to move into something that's more experimental and a bit more methodical and has some room for failure. These fail-safe experiments are important. And usually, if an organization is drifted to either end of this, they need to come back and balance more in the center. So depending on what your appetite for risk is, the organization you're working for is going to depend on if you feel comfortable. And that culture is a lot of the work and research I've been doing lately centered around that.
So what you're saying is a company who has desire to succeed in DevOps should move to maybe from a more risk-averse stance to a more risk-accepting position. And also in the, should they, as an organization, be open to failure a little bit more?
Yeah, you need to have this in a fail-safe situation. So you can run some A/B experimentation in prod about which user experience people prefer. That's not the place to experiment so much with security. And, moving from proof of concept into something minimally viable before you get it into production, and making sure you've got that middle state, not just a proof of concept in prod is not a fail-safe experiment, right?
So a follow-up question to that. I'll get to you guys just a minute. If I were to start experimenting more, did you start with, what kind of applications did you start? Did you start with a non-mission critical, something like people can use this application to reserve conference rooms? Or you start with something like actually more core to your business?
We're looking for Pareto efficient Nash equilibriums, which I can talk about more later tonight over drinks if you'd like. But really what we're looking for is something that's a mutual win for both the customer, the business, and the employees inside the organization. We really want everybody to be happy.
All right, I'll come back to that. Paula, when you and I were discussing about content, a related topic come up is the concept of fear. All right, so if you have failure, you're going to have fear. So can you talk a little bit about the level of fear and how organizations deal with that within the DevOps context?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we've been doing is really focusing on building teams. The team centricity has been a model we're trying to really make how we do business. And one of the things that you get out of a team is trust. And I think one of the things that tends to happen, I feel like I have a habit in my career of being thrown at bad problems. This project's broken. Can you go fix it? And the challenge I always have is that when it's broken, everybody's trust tends to be broken as well. They're used to being shot at. They're used to being blamed. It's a culture of blame. And that's not a culture you can go in and say, hey, you're all getting shot at, but guess what? I have this brand new unicorn thing. It's not going to go anywhere. So in the transformations that we've done, the first thing we do is either find a good team, like somewhere in there's an already good team that you can pick on, or help a team become that good team, help create that trust first. And then you can bring the conversation about how you're going to change a working pattern and let the team drive that conversation. I mean, I think there's certain context in introducing them to the concept of ideas and all of that kind of thing. But, and I think that's something from the security context. Are you on the same team, or are you like the folks that are outside of the team?
Right.
Because
I was going to ask that question.
my security folks are on the team, and it makes all the difference in the world because, I was thinking actually recently, just a couple weeks ago, new threat had come up, and the security teams, sort of do, we don't quite do the red team, blue team, but we do sort of war game stuff in the staging environment. They found something, they said, ooh, new threat, and immediately they ran to the developers and said, we found this new thing, it's brand new, we need you to go update your static code inspection. Can we work with you to kind of build it so that we don't put something like this into production? We just found it, and it was not their immediate reaction was to go flog the development team, and the development team had no idea this was a threat until a week ago. So that collaborative nature of being part of the same team, can I help you? The fact that can I help you was in the email is to me a sign of a culture. And that's what you're trying to kind of build. But I mean, I'm conscious of saying, well, it's all about culture, because that makes people feel like, well, I can never do this.
So security team as part of the application development team, right? But do they have a virtual centralized security? Do you have a virtual centralized security function which oversees some of the security initiatives within different application dev teams?
Most of our teams, and we have both like virtual teams and co-located. Co-located is absolutely better, just for the record. But most of the teams interface with some form of SOC, right? The SOC's still like the command and control center, and our security, ISOs are that connection point between the SOC. They're not doing the SOC function, but they're sort of assigned. A lot of them, they have a portfolio of like their applications. It's not just today you do this and tomorrow you do that thing. They have their apps. They know their applications. They know what their applications do, and that's super helpful because they actually know the business function that's going on in this app, and that makes a big difference. I think a lot of times we just look at security things arbitrarily. It matters in some apps a lot more. This breach is more sensitive for that app than for this app, and so therefore this is more important than that, because if you're going to be able to prioritize, which you need to, we can't solve all problems. You need to actually understand the business function you're doing. And I think having the security developers on that team, it's their app, they have an ownership of it that really exceeds the just, congratulations, I got a checkbox, I proved you were wrong. I mean, it changes the attitude.
So Cornelius, a related topic that you and I were talking is certainly you at Booz Allen, you work with different customers and you've seen different organizational types, right? And today you're helping a customer of yours to get to so maybe the first stage of DevOps maturity. How does the conversation come about? Does the customer come to you say, hey, we heard this thing called DevOps, and how do we do it? Or do you go to them and say, hey, here are the proven benefits of implementing DevOps initiatives within your organization, and we can help you get there? How does the conversation get started?
Well, the conversation kind of starts with, how can I get an application out into production faster? How can I support my core customer base? And with that becomes the requirement. And then it's like, well, there's a new thing out there called DevOps. And go research, show what you can about how quickly things can go. If you're in the neighborhood of perhaps taking an application in a sort of a more traditional method, perhaps even agile, and you take the application, you throw it over the fence to your authorization and assessment team, that's not a lot of context in many ways for an authorization and assessment team to look and say, okay, great, now let's just speed through this. This is great. We'll just put it out. We'll make sure we do the static code scans are actually reviewed, everything like that. It can definitely be sold by saying, well, hey, this can bring things to production faster. And the key is we all work together. So you could take separate teams, so you have your authorization and assessment and your cybersecurity team working more closely involved in the pipeline. They become stakeholders in it. You have your application development teams that can now don't see cybersecurity teams as adversaries almost. And the frustration levels will decrease. And overall, I think it makes everybody happier.
So, finish the thought.
Customers happier also.
Does it make a difference that you are a consultant to the organization and having these conversations versus internally some engineer say, hey, we got to do DevOps? Does it bring more credibility? The question is, for folks in the audience who's maybe trying to start this kind of initiatives, should they get a consultancy to come in and help?
Yeah, I think it can help. Being able to actually say, well, this has been done, we've seen this done at different organizations, and here are some examples, will always help. But then it definitely is probably, I think, one of the key components is to have a champion within the organization on the client side that can affect change. And once they can set the tone, then that will definitely help an organization out.
So what level of role this champion should be? How effective? Should it be the dev lead? Should it be a director of engineering? What level of role a champion should be to become really effective champion?
I would say probably somebody in the CTO level, at that level higher.
Yeah, I would say as someone who's been pushing from a grassroots perspective, having the executive buy-in definitely helps. Going grassroots from the bottom up is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
And I would say that sometimes you'll find champions at multiple levels are required. I mean, I feel like that was something that we saw we really needed both in the transformations we've done with agencies and even our own internal. I mean, we had to transform how we worked. And what helped was different champions, because sometimes meetings would happen over here and one of those champions would catch somebody kind of going sideways and say, that's not how we want to work. So if it's only the person at the top, they're only in so many meetings a day. So I think the right combination is a little bit of both grassroots and from the top. And if you have both of those, so if you're in the grassroots, you got to go find a good executive to support you. And if you're at the top, you got to find some good grassroots people to kind of be your arms and legs. So I think it kind of goes both directions.
Wolfgang?
Yeah, most definitely goes both directions. When you're talking about cultural change, you need an influencer at every level. You need a champion at every level, right? Someone in IT, someone in dev, someone at the C level. Because, like you say, they're going to start sliding backwards. There's going to be an opportunity at each one of those points to nudge that culture a little bit forward, and having that champion at each level identified is critical.
Right. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and even the organization, how many people in here are enterprise? How many people work for startups? Yeah, less startups. So a flatter organization is going to have an easier time with a grassroots DevOps champion. A larger enterprise organization that's got more vertical structure, you really need more buy-in from the top, or you need to understand how to run a fail-safe experiment where you can punt on 4th and long.
So the concept of the fail-safe experiment is very interesting to me. One of the things that I thought as a question I'm going to ask is this concept that I've been hearing some of my DevOps peeps are saying is think big and execute small. So what that means is you think on a bigger strategic level in terms of DevOps, but when you start to execute, you pick small components, small teams where you can get quick wins from. And it's critical to identify those small execution points where you can carry the initiative forward. Now, fail-safe might be a model of saying, how do I pick these components that I can derive a fail-safe strategy around it, so I can you really push them to the next level of maturity without impacting the core business at the same time. Now, one of the things that I'm seeing at Twistlock is people are buying things differently now. So we have customers that are deploying us for 2 weeks in the trial, and 2 weeks later, we're in production. As a security product, I have never seen it in my life. As a security analyst for a long time, security products been testing, they're putting a stage environment for a long time before they're pushed into production. But DevOps have changed the way security functions are being acquired into the organization. So I want to throw this question, and also please come to the mic if you have a question for the panelists, is how do you start by acquiring new functions into the organization when the developer is saying, hey, we need this tomorrow, right, or today? How do you start doing this from the operation side to really making things happen, and still your boss is saying, okay, nobody's going to break in, from the government side, Paula, right? That's a big thing. We're still going to be operational tomorrow. Nothing's going to collapse. How do you put together an initiative to make that happen? How long does it take?
I think I was going to say that I'm convinced one of the most... Start small.
Yeah.
That's a big mantra of mine. And I'm really convinced batch size is probably one of the most effective cultural things you can do to your teams to make them better at DevOps. And I'll say from an organizational transformation, I can count about 5 agencies now where we've gone in, and rather than tackle the whole enterprise, which is just a daunting and really almost unsolvable problem, we've tried to find an application or a corner of the universe that really, I would say the characteristic is how much control do people inside the agency have to let you experiment. It has very little to do with the actual characteristic of that thing. It's just like the political characteristic of that thing that you can go experiment with. It's either something that there's a compelling urgency to go fast on, so they're motivated to kind of let you break a few rules, or something that they have enough control of, Congress isn't looking over their shoulder, or, enough internal control that they can experiment. And inside that experiment, basically just do it the right way. Do it very quickly, minimum viable product, something very simple, very elegant, and just use that as your proof point, because then you can go back to the enterprise and say, see, I built this thing, it's highly secure, it's highly reliable, I did it using DevOps, and let's now talk about how I can do this somewhere else in the agency. That seems to be the real, just from a success factor, if you don't have to start big, just doing one successful thing. It's that quick win. I love John Cotter. He talks about sort of having that quick win. And that's kind of how you can get it, is you find that place that's sort of politically viable to do a pilot. And sometimes it's just the place where you happen to have people who are really transformative in the organization willing to pilot with you. Right. Then you can build a quick success. And for us, I'm talking 8 weeks, which is in the federal government, you can't buy a pen in 8 weeks. So, we had a pilot where we had a contract, and 6 weeks later we had a production system.
6 weeks later?
6 weeks later we had a system running in production. And like I said, in the federal government, you can't buy a pin that fast. So it was amazing. And now that agency, they kind of wanted it. They were throwing out the buzzwords, but the whole tone of the conversation in that agency has completely changed, because they've seen a really significant system that was deployed in that short time frame that has the full stack of security and ops. And, it wasn't just the application piece. It was the whole lift of behind it, and I think if you can find that somewhere in your enterprise that you can do that experiment and be successful at it, it is a risk, because if it doesn't go well, but it's also a small risk. If we had failed, it was a small risk. It was probably a pretty high profile risk, but it was small, and so the agency could have recovered from it. But it really did change the tenor of the conversation, and we've repeated that template a couple of times, and I'm really convinced it's just a really great way to sort of break the log jam of the conversation.
Does anybody else have an example of an application you started with that fits that profile? It's small, and politically it doesn't cause a big brouhaha if you fail, and also the risks-wise is can be managed, right?
Yeah, definitely. As we were going through the transition, we had 2 tracks. We had the traditional way we were building apps, and we had this new DevOps way we were building apps. And there is decision criteria.
Did you do A/B testing on developing the same apps?
No, not the same apps, right? So it's like, okay, we've got to build this functionality. And we would look at things like, what's the risk if it doesn't succeed? Do we have the right influencers in place? Again, influencers up and down the stack. If it succeeds, do we have a good story that we can tell that will drive the story and the change forward? And what's the cultural ramification of success or failure? And we looked at all 4 of those components, and then we started dividing up the workflow. And you hit the nail on the head. I love it. The batch size was critical. We moved from thinking of we're going to change a team to DevOps to we're going to change an app to DevOps to we're going to change one single function within that app to DevOps. And each change by change, function by function, release by release, was how we built momentum and how we got more buy-in. And slowly but surely, more of those apps went over. And then it became not, is this mission critical or not? Because if it's mission critical, we're going to run it through our old process. It was more like, okay, the criticality can expand, the importance can expand because we have a greater degree of confidence in this DevOps process.
So I have a related question to that. Now, you start small, you have done a few successful implementations. How do you, or does this happen naturally? Where do you get the budget for new experiments? Does it in the end increase the development budget? Does it decrease development budget because you're pushing things out faster? How does the budgeting process work? Anybody?
For us, we adopted DevOps because we're in a cost-centric model. We're very cost-constrained, we're very resource-constrained, which is one of the reasons why we went this way. So for us, it ended up being more cost-effective. We shaved off around 20% of our overall costs.
20% of development or 20% altogether operations?
Altogether, IT and development.
20%.
Yeah, so we're doing this in a process where we're shrinking.
Yeah, and I would actually say, I guess that's the benefit of the short pilot too, is that if you can focus even on taking an existing process and making an improvement to it, you get payback, and just you get quick payback, and then you pay for the next improvement, and it's kind of, so there's this upfront investment, but you don't have to make a huge upfront investment. You make a small upfront investment, find one dramatic improvement, get the money back for that, and now you've basically got a self-funding improvement cycle. We actually find a lot of success in firm fixed price doing that because we're incentivized to improve our margin, and it's a small upfront investment for us is worth it because we know the math, we have benchmarks, we know this works.
Absolutely.
And I think we're seeing that you should avoid a monolithic application, but you should also avoid a monoculture, and there's strength in diversity. So I've had a couple things where we've been asked to solve something, and there's multiple ideas for those solutions. And instead of taking too much time, I'm not sure y'all are familiar with yak shaving or bike shedding, but just debating this thing, it's like, okay, everybody go spin up your thing and see if you can get it to work. And we take a day or two, and we get to that point. And then the specific use case we were given, we see which candidate that we were actually able to stand up and run that worked the way we expected and satisfied the requirements. Our product owners in a position where they've got some options in front of them instead of take it or leave it. And even after that product owner says, this is the thing I was really looking for, we come to find out that plan B and C ended up having somewhere they could be useful elsewhere in the organization or elsewhere in the life cycle. And I think that's important with security. It's this concept of two-factor authentication, really. You want this to be multiple factor, right? Like, I'm not going to grab one open source project, scan my code base, and then say I'm good. I want to take that report and bring it to security, and I want security working outside the organization to say, yes, this is valid, they're doing a good job of it, and I want multiple controls in there if I can get them to, mitigate risk further, really. You can't assume the one true thing's going to make it to the finish line. If you've got multiple horses in the race, you're fine if one of them drops out. It's fail-safe, right?
So we don't have a lot of time left. The last question I really want to get some conversation on is the idea of security innovation within DevOps, right? So you were talking about how, now once we move away from monolithic applications, what that means is in microservices components, you can do things differently for each component, including security, right? Some of the component maybe you want to monitor much more heavily than others. Some of the component maybe you want to run some wrapper around, others don't. That gives you a much more flexibility and also fine-grained control that traditional monolithic applications do not afford. So any of you can comment on security innovation as opposed to just moving from development to one model to another, but really increasing the overall security for the system as propelled by DevOps.
Sure, I'd like to throw in on that. Chenxi, one of the big factors that we're concerned about is when you do get into production is continuous monitoring. That's
sorry, what monitoring?
Continuous monitoring.
Continuous monitoring, yeah.
So there's when you have a pipeline and you can use a product, and there's one called twist lock. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the ability to kind of decompress the layers of a container and kind of say, okay, well, this is what I actually approved to go into production. Is this the actual layer, right? So with being able to actually say, hey, that can actually go out on production because it's not the approved layer that was actually put in place and approved in the Docker Trusted Registry that a pipeline may have, that is a key factor in being able to really kind of allay the concerns of a lot of security folks and authorizing officials that I've seen. So continuous monitoring and some of the newer tools out there. Plus, when you can throw in a web application pen testing tool to be able to kind of say, okay, well now, we've put out a new web app and we've going to cover ourselves also and make our AO happier by being able to say we're automating pen testing with tools to be able to, as part of a feedback loop, just to make sure.
And I've had a lot of luck with reducing technical debt, that if we can run lean, it removes a lot of complexity and a lot of security vulnerabilities. As you port code to a new framework or deprecate a particular set of functionality, there's usually a lot of backlog items that can be wiped out. If you're pushing a physically smaller application into prod because you've cut a lot of this out, you often see performance gains out of it. So there's room to bring security in as a partner where we're trying to get budget and priority for certain initiatives that maybe we don't have buy-in from business. If security comes in and backs it up and says not only is this going to cut down your backlog, improve web performance, but we're also going to improve our security posture. It brings a lot to the table, and it's we don't want a data breach. We don't want any network intrusion, but we don't want builds to fail or a shopping cart to crash at the end of the day. These are all risks to be mitigated. Security is a real specific subset of that risk, but approaching it from that perspective has it's a quick win, and you get a lot of cooperation and a lot of immediate results.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. I like simple innovation, right? I like innovation that makes a great deal of impact, but without a little bit of work. And when you think about writing code, every time you write one line of code, you're introducing more vulnerabilities to the system, you're increasing your attack surface, right? And so many of our recent outbreaks like Blaster or Heartbleed or GoToFail were all just one line of code being messed up. Ultimately, by empowering the developers, giving them instrumentation into the code they're creating, giving them the ability to write clean code and know what is clean and what's not, what's vulnerable and what's not, that is going to have a huge innovation with security. Because as you mentioned, as it decouples and you no longer have that central monolithic access control layer, we are dependent upon the decisions every single day that our developers are making for security.
And I absolutely agree with I think simplicity is an underused security tool. In that, in fact, about a month ago, I had a team that had sort of a security breach in production that was one of these, I call it like the Venn diagram bugs, where it's like this framework with that framework on this thing on every second Tuesday when you spin around 3 times kind of bug that was super hard to find. I mean, we were scanning everything like upside, downside, all the way from the dev tool chain all the way to production. And we actually could prove out of like a million users, only 72 people would actually see this thing. But but it was still there, and we still had to fix it, and we did. And then afterwards, we thought, well, how did it get there? And as we thought about it, how it got there was we had the things to make the Venn diagram. That had we actually made a somewhat simpler application, we would have prevented the issue. And so actually the full resolution, after they repaired the security flaw, was to go in and actually remove stuff from the application. They took things out that they thought they could take out, and that was their fix. And I think that's an example of often we think we solve problems by adding more engineering complexity. And if we changed our mindset and said maybe that complexity is its own security problem.
Complexity is the enemy for security.
Yeah,
really is.
I think that's a takeaway I see, and I also think that a team that's dealing in a simpler, sort of, a simpler set. It's like your mind's free to innovate. You can't innovate when you're in a firefight. And when you're out of firefight, and now you are dealing with a very straightforward problem, you're tackling problems, and you can actually address those problems. So I think that's kind of a key.
So we have to conclude this panel. Unfortunately, don't have a lot of time to go into other issues, but I want to leave you with one parting story. I have a customer that is running tons of microservices application. They have to move from Red Hat operating system to another operating system for various reasons. But their application is making $8,000 a minute. Right? Now, in traditional application environment, there's no way you can swap out the operating system without disrupting the operation of the application. They were able to completely change. They have over tens of thousands of hosts, right? This is a cloud application. And they were able to swap out the operating system from underneath the application within 2 weeks with no disruption, 0-second disruption to the application, because everything's engineered on microservices and Docker containers. So that is the future we're looking at. So thank you so much, and let's give a big hand to the panelists.